They're claiming 35,000 dead in Gaza since October the 7th.
Israel has killed
over 35,000 Palestinians
in Gaza.
But what if I told you this was a lie? Stick around as I'm going to uncover the shocking truth behind these numbers. Let's begin our investigation with Gaza's Ministry of Health, as they're the ones who publish the death toll.
We take figures from the Gaza Health Ministry,
which is our counterpart on dealing with the death tolls.
But the question is, can we trust them? Doubts about their reliability first surfaced at the beginning of the war when they appeared to fabricate fatalities following an explosion at the Al Ahli hospital.
Reports from the run health ministry that as many as 500, possibly more, killed in this airstrike.
I'll get into the details of what happened in a minute, so keep watching. But this incident marked the beginning of a pattern of deception. In this short video, I'll show you 4 ways that the ministry's been deceiving the global media from the very beginning. Here's a list compiled by the Ministry of Health. It claims to show every person who died in Gaza since the 7th of October. The list includes the name, age, gender, and ID number from the Palestinian Population Registry. Pay close attention to this ID number, as it's key to proving that their numbers are fake. But before diving into the numbers, let's return to the Al Ahli hospital. The story of an explosion first broke at 7:30, and within minutes, Al Jazeera was reporting that the ministry had claimed that 500 people were killed. A few days after the incident, they published their first list of fatalities since the beginning of the war. If you look at this graph from their report, you can clearly see the alleged hospital deaths recorded in a large spike on the day of the explosion. But here's the catch. There's no way this explosion could have killed that many people. Look at this photo taken the following morning. It shows a rocket hit a car park, leaving a tiny crater and very little damage. Sure, there's fire damage to the cars nearby, but beyond that, except for a few broken windows and broken tiles, every building is intact. For 500 fatalities, people would need to be packed tightly into the blast area, which just isn't plausible in a car park. Tragically, there were fatalities, as displaced Palestinians had been sheltering in this area, but these casualties were in the dozens and not the hundreds. The ministry was clearly inflating the numbers to vilify Israel. Moreover, the rocket wasn't even fired by Israel. It was launched by Islamic Jihad and fell short, landing in the hospital car park. Now that we've seen how the ministry manipulates the figures, let's switch focus to the UN, as they're one of the primary authenticators of this data. Now, the UN have consistently relied on the ministry's figures, claiming over 35,000 casualties had been identified. But then, on the 30th of April, they were forced to revise down this number to 24,686 after the ministry revealed almost 11,000 of their recorded deaths hadn't been fully identified. Israeli news outlets quickly jumped on this dramatic revision, causing an uproar. But the UN were unfazed and insisted it was just a change in reporting, not a revision of the 35,000 figure.
The overall number of fatalities, that number remains unchanged, and it's at more than 35,000 people since October 7th. What's changed is the Ministry of Health in Gaza has updated the breakdown of fatalities, for whom full details have been documented. They gave figures for 24,686 out of 34,622 overall fatalities recorded in Gaza. Meanwhile, as you can see if you do the math, that there's about another 10,000 plus bodies who still have to be fully identified.
After hearing this, political pundits and news outlets rushed to accuse the Israeli outlets of spreading fake news.
Last week, the Jerusalem Post, an Israeli newspaper, published this piece headlined, UN seemingly halves estimate of Gazan women, children killed.
No, they did not half the numbers.
What they're making a song and dance about, what they're pretending is some smoking gun evidence of a Hamas cover-up, is literally just the difference between fully identified bodies and unidentified or partially identified bodies.
Did you catch that? Both Mehdi and the UN claimed the numbers were correct, but with a catch. They mentioned some of those listed hadn't been fully identified. But what does fully mean? Were they missing a name or a date of birth? A couple of days later they clarified.
The way this works is the bodies or the deaths get counted and registered. That's important. Normally at health facilities, meaning at hospitals or at the morgues. So an ambulance will bring a dead person, or somebody brings the dead person to a morgue. That's where they get registered. So as people are still under the rubble, dead in mass graves somewhere out there on the side of the road, couldn't get picked up in a conflict area. As long as all this is happening, there are still people out there which can't be identified. This accounts for the 10,000 that we know of, or that the health ministry talks about, which are the approximately 10,000 not yet identified.
This is a staggering admission. For weeks, the media insisted that over 35,000 bodies had been identified, but in reality, a third of those hadn't been identified at all. We're simply relying on the ministry to be honest after they've already been caught inflating the numbers. It gets worse. We analysed those people who were supposedly identified, and what we found will shock you. Next, let's dig into the fatality list provided by the ministry. Each entry includes an ID number which is used as the primary mechanism for validating each person, but incredibly, 1,674 entries didn't even have an ID. With those entries removed, our death toll shrinks to 23,012. But that's just the beginning. We then checked if the IDs provided were in the right format. They need to be 9 digits long and only contain numbers. We found 850 IDs that didn't meet this criteria, and a further 12 that appeared more than once. It continues. IDs are split into 2 parts. The first 8 digits are an identification number, and the last digit is a check digit used to verify if the ID is valid. When we ran these IDs through a validation check, a staggering 1,522 were invalid.